Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's What Turns You On webinar. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, July 14th, right smack dab in the middle of summer. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of consent. So, as usual, a few things before we get started. I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box because I can't see the chat box. The chat box will be used for any links that might be helpful to you, whether I mention a book or a URL for something or our phone number or information at CHS. And I will answer your questions when you put them into the Q&A box. Also, be sure to leave us a any kind of review or comments on Amazon for What Turns You On. Let us know what you love about the workbook, how you're using it, how you've shared it, how maybe it's been helpful to you or someone close to you. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. And that way you'll never miss a post. You can also keep up with what we're doing here by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. And lastly, make sure to sign up for our mailing list by clicking the link in the chat box so you can keep up with upcoming events, webinars, services, and more at Center for Healthy Sex. So this webinar series has been exploring the aspects of my workbook, What Turns You On, a guide to living your best sex life. And it's designed to help you get honest with yourself about how you define sex so that you can enjoy the kind of touch and sexual activities you really enjoy. And so you can also have explicit and meaningful exchanges with a sexual partner. There was a recent article in the New Yorker talking about just how much um, younger people are struggling with sex and sexuality because of growing up with a generation of porn. And this is not just late stage millennials, but Gen Z, the Zoomers, really, and how fewer young people are having sex because more of them were exposed to pornography really early on. And that has created a real dissonance for people about sex because they're so grossed out and traumatized in some ways by the images they saw. Maybe the images weren't that horrible for adults, but as an 8-year-old child, they were really traumatizing. So I am endeavoring to give people some kind of guidelines for how they can reclaim their sexuality from pornography, and get really familiar with yourself. Get familiar with what you like, what you want, what's true for you, not some weird expectation that came out of pornography or movies or culture or anything less. And we can also think about this when it comes to fashion preferences, or trends or anything, like these ideas of what we're supposed to be, and FOMO and all of that, as opposed to what's really true for me. Because there's so many choices out there today that it creates massive anxiety for people. You don't know what to wear, you don't know what kind of hairstyle to have, or if you should even have hair. Should you have fake nails or real nails, or fake eyelashes or real eyelashes? Should you wear this kind of shoe or that kind of shoe? So I really want to create a space and make an invitation for each and every one of us to develop our own style, our own fashion style, hairstyle, sexual style, preferences, and where we go on vacation, as opposed to what we think everybody else is doing and what we should be doing, because that is a real form of slavery and colonization, and it's the expertise of capitalism. When you feel bad about yourself, then capitalism is really doing its job because it has you wanting to go buy something to make yourself feel better or do something that you're not really aligned with because you think that's what you should be doing. So think about that today as we're talking, especially as we talk about this matter of consent. Merriam-Webster gives one definition of consent as to give assent or approval to agree. So if I assent to something, or I approve something, or I agree with something, then I'm consenting to doing it. So what does consent mean to you? And have you really deconstructed that and thought about what does that mean to me? Because a lot of times um, our silence gets confused by other people as consent, or a non-response gets confused as consent. So if you ask me a question about how I feel about something, whether it's in business or in personal life, and I don't answer because maybe I don't have an answer, or I don't want an answer, the other party can confuse that as meaning that I'm going along with it when I haven't. I have not consented to it. So don't confuse silence in a partner with consent. If you don't have a clear answer from that person, what they call a hell yes in the kink world, then you don't have an answer. So you have to have yourself a clear definition of what consent means to you, especially when it comes to sex. So how do you currently handle the matter of consent? Do you actually talk about it explicitly, or do you have a conversation about it? Or have you found other ways to let people know that you're into something, like something, or not? But this is a time for you to probably make some notes and to think about that question. Well, how do I define consent? That's the first question. And the second one is, how do I handle it? Do I talk to my partner about it or my sexual partners about it? On the front end. And it's really funny because older generations just think that's the weirdest thing. Like the boomers probably wouldn't do that, but the millennials do it. And so, whatever your age range is, think about what the normative standard is for that and then go against it. Do the right thing. Um, think about what it means for you and how you communicate that to someone else. And what would you currently like to do differently in this land of consent? Especially, I really want to caution you if you're on dating apps, like if you're on Bumble or Hinge or Grindr or something else, really think about when you're hooking up with a stranger. Let's say you've chatted with them a couple times, but they seem appealing to you. You want to have sex with them. How are you going to manage consent with this stranger? Do you do it while you're texting? Do you do it after you've gotten together? What is the safest thing to do? And really, my bias is that you do it on the front end, as much as possible to say, okay, um, I just want to let you know up front what I like and what I don't like. And you've got to really get granular about how you define that. You've got to be very careful because let's say somebody has a particular kink and both parties can't make an assumption that they both know exactly what that is or what that means. Then let's say somebody likes being tied up. Well, there are a million ways to tie somebody up, from, light and gentle scarves or material to handcuffs without a key. So be very, very careful about how you're defining what you do and don't like, which is one of the purposes of the workbook for you to like wade through all of that, so that you can really be clear about it with the person you're communicating with. So you're not misrepresenting yourself, and so you're not getting hurt also. So that would be the other question. How do you handle it? What would you like to do differently? And if you'd already agreed to something, can you change your mind? So I've talked about this before, and I think it's essential that people hear that just because you consent to something before you start having sex, while you're having sex, if something hurts or you don't like it, or you're starting to feel anxious or panicky, you have to stop and say, I don't like this or I don't want this now. You have every single right to change your mind. It's like ordering a hamburger for lunch and you take the first bite and you don't like it and you don't want to finish eating it. You don't have to, or anything else for that matter. So just because you agreed to it, can you change your mind? The answer is yes. But my question to you is, will you change your mind or will you just go along to get along? Will you check out? Will you just hope it's going to be over? Eventually, what I think happens there is that we end up violating ourselves because we don't stop or say no. And certainly the other person can violate you too. But if you're not participating actively in what's going on, you are in part a party to it. And if you can't do that, then you really need to rethink who you're having sex with. It should only be with somebody that you know and trust well, as opposed to anonymous hookups or casual sexual encounters. So, what does no really mean? Um, and when does no really mean no for you? So, is no yes? Do you need a safe word the way people in the kink community use safe words? So, no can be a playful, sexual, erotic experience, but it doesn't really mean no. But if no means no for you, you really need to let your partner know that. And if it's part of erotic play for you, then you need to choose a different word like cappuccino or tangerine or apple or something like that, so that when your partner hears it, they know that that is an explicit do not do that. So let's look at the ABCs of consent, shall we? So A stands for awareness. How aware of you are you of your body? What do you want from your sexual experience? Do you want something that feels more sensuous, more transcendent, more like you're in a trance state and it's all just about body sensation? Or are you looking for some kind of deep, soulful, eye-to-eye connection? Do you want talking? Do you like sex light and playful or rough and tumble sex? What is the experience that you want from your sexual encounter or experience? And is it the same with every person or is it different from person to person? Like, what is really right for you? So this is an invitation, another one, to do some writing about these questions, so that you get clear with yourself, so that when you're clear with yourself, you can communicate it to a partner. And what do you like sexually? That's a very big question. And I like to break that down also for people. And that's another place in the workbook where you can spend a lot of time asking yourself, yes, no, maybe, I don't know. I'd like to try this, but who do I want to try it with? Is it somebody I know, somebody I don't know? How safe is that, etc. And what do you need in order to feel safe enough to have sex? So again, safety is a huge component of a sexual experience. If you don't feel safe with somebody, then you really want to consider why you're getting involved with them sexually, because it's such a vulnerable thing to do. And it's a place where you can get hurt if you're not careful, whether it's emotionally or physically. You can still hurt yourself in that way. And what do you need to trust a sexual partner? That's part of a trust and safety question. Do you need to know them? Is it just a vibe? Do you have to know their friends? Do you have to date them for a while? If you're in the world of hooking up or casual sex, how do you know when you're safe? How do you know that you can trust somebody that you just met hours ago? What are the earmarks of that? And maybe, danger, a little danger is part of what's arousing for you. But if that's the case, then who do you let know where you're going and who you're going with, so you're not really putting yourself in harm's way? These are quite important questions, I think. Um, And I just want to remind you that you can put your questions in the Q&A box if you're thinking of them now. Just go ahead and drop them in. Also along those lines, what is pleasurable for you? And what's pleasurable for you kind of goes back to the question of, well, what do you like sexually? So what's pleasurable? What do you like? How do you communicate that? And what's pleasurable and what you like can also change from day to day, month to month, year to year, decade to decade. Sometimes we don't know until we're in the thick of things or we learn something, from a sexual encounter that we never knew we liked that much. So what is pleasurable for you? What do you like? What turns you on? And spend some time investigating and answering these questions. I think these are very important questions, these questions of awareness. Am I aware of who I am at this age, what I like and don't like, what feels good to me, what scares me, how do I feel safe, how do I trust somebody? Those are important parts of consent. So if anybody has any questions or comments about awareness, feel free to type them into the chat box. So B of the ABCs of consent stands for boundaries. So do you know what a boundary is? Would be my first question to you. And if you don't, there are a couple of books on boundaries that you can find, obviously on Amazon or in any bookstore. One of them is called Boundaries, Where You End and I Begin by Anne Catherine, Catherine with the K, I believe. There are other simple little books, and when I say little, yeah, they're like 100 pages on helping you understand and define, like, what is a boundary? Um, how do I set boundaries? Because if you don't know what a boundary is and then you can't set one, and then you will not um, be able to have a conversation with people about what boundaries are. Okay, so are you available for sexual contact on the first, second, third, fifth, 10th date? Do you know what's right for you? And I'm not suggesting that you set a rigid rule that I won't have sex with anybody until I've gone out with them X number of times. I think those rule books are problematic. I think they're made for people who don't really know themselves well. And there can be a rigidity that goes with that. Um, so I would suggest that you write out a plan for you, what is true for you in terms of what's sexually healthy. How do you even know somebody in 2 dates? You don't. But let's say you meet somebody and you just have an amazing amount of chemistry with them, and you don't not sure if they're relationship material or not, and maybe you're not looking for a relationship. So you decide you want to have sex with them. So that's fine, but what are the parameters? What are the boundaries? How do you know when you're safe, etc.? All those questions still should be present for you in your way of thinking about it. But if you're dating and you are looking for a relationship, then you should ask yourself that question of when am I available to have sex with a person? So, are you available for sexual contact? And if so, when in the scheme of things? Because keep in mind, a lot of people end up having sex and they don't know the person and they might have a lot of sex with them and then they wake up a couple months later and they realize, oh, I don't even like this person. I don't know where this is going, and now I don't feel very good about myself. So maybe you just chalk it up to that was fun, but I'm not doing that again. So what are you looking for? What do you want? And what about penetrative sex? Because the first question was, are you available for sexual contact on the first, second, fifth, eighth date, as opposed to sexual intercourse, which has to do with penetration, regardless of gender. When are you available for penetrative sex? And what does that mean to you? And does it matter to you? Does it even have meaning to you? What would it mean to the other person? These are things that people think about when, excuse me, they start to take control of their sexuality. They start to create their own rules and mores and values, and they don't care what other people think about them. If you set a boundary for yourself and you've mapped out what's true for you sexually and you can share it with somebody else, then their judgments about you being uptight or too promiscuous or uncool should be a red flag that you just don't want to be with that person because they cannot honor what's true for you and what you need in order to feel free and open and erotic and have fun sexually. Being uptight and scared and going through the motions is not sexy, and you're only hurting yourself. All right, someone asked a question here. Struggling with verbal communication around sex in my marriage. My wife and I have different preferences of communication. Hers is through experience and actions. Mine is to communicate through words and intention. We're having structure. This leaves us in a tough spot for talking about sex because of these differences, ideas to bridge this difference. That's so interesting because that is like a typical gender reversal where oftentimes females feel like they need to talk about sex more and men just want to experience it. So I'm wondering if you know enough about each other's sexual style that you would be willing to slow down the sexual contact between the two of you. And while your wife is having the sexual experience, let's say, of you stroking her body, asking her what that feels like, what she likes, and she would have to be willing to meet you in that arena and talk to you during the experience. Because she's saying, I don't want to talk about sex, I just want to have the experience. And you're saying, I need to talk about sex so I can understand what you like, what you don't like, how we can have a more erotic experience. Then you have to meet each other halfway. And if she's unwilling to do that, then I would really challenge what's going on with her, or she should be challenging herself to ask herself why she's so uncomfortable talking about sex explicitly, what scares her about that. I would make up that for some people, they have shame about their sex and sexuality, or their sexual style is to kind of just go into a trance state because they just want to feel sensations in their body and they can't really connect intimately with their partner because eye contact, talking during sex is a very vulnerable thing to do. So she's going to have to talk to somebody about this, if not you, at least a therapist, I would hope, or to do some writing herself and to let you know why that's so difficult for her. Um, I would also turn your attention to Miss Jaya's sexual styles. You can find that on her website. I think it's just missjaya.com. And you can take some free tests there to see what your sexual styles are. And maybe your wife would be willing to share that with you. Both of you take it and share the information with each other. It's kind of a fun thing to do also to see where your differences are and you figure out how to bridge them or what you both need to do. All right, thank you. That's a good question. And not an uncommon one, by the way. Christina writes, I feel like awareness in the way you described with curiosity can make the topic of consent more fun and adventurous, for sure. Thank you. So many I talk to feel that consent is a spontaneity blocker. It's not. I mean, people have told me over the years, even those in recovery from sex addiction, when they talk about the questions at the end of each chapter in erotic intelligence, they end up feeling aroused because intimacy has to do with the conversations between us, the vulnerability between us. That creates a feeling of arousal and eroticism. So I really want to invite you all to start talking about sex with your partners. Because that can be a form of foreplay, not because you're trying to make it, it's not necessarily dirty talk. It's just let's set the stage for how we're going to do this. It would be like agreeing to go to, the Hollywood Bowl. which for those of you that don't know is an outdoor concert setting here in the summer. Like who's bringing the food? Who's bringing the drinks? Where are we parking? Are we taking the bus? Are we going to walk to the venue after we park? Like, what are we doing? How do we plan this? And part of the planning can be part of the fun and the excitement of getting to go. Okay, question here from Rob. A recent partner took issue with me saying I'm too much in my head as I approach sex and connection with her. She operates from her body. Oh, this sounds like the last person. I've even been told that I approach sex more like a business proposal than an intimate connective act. Even in the heat of the moment, she was frustrated that I didn't intuitively read her nonverbal cues very well. Any advice for how to balance verbal consent with intuitive cues? Well, I would suggest you do challenge yourself with that. What happens that you're not feeling the temperature of your partner's skin? You're not tracking, her breathing or her body's responsiveness to what you're doing. Because there should be an intuitive dance to sex. Once you know what the parameters are, this is sort of a silly analogy, but if you take the idea of a playpen, like a toddler in a playpen, they're in a contained space, so they are safe, right? They're not going to get lost, they're not going to hurt themselves. And then what you put into that space is what they get to play with. But there are no rules about how they play with their stuffed animals, or their choo-choo train. They get to do whatever they want with it, and they get to intuitively play within the parameters that they've set. So I would ask you, what happens to you that you don't trust that you've set these parameters, and that you're also not enjoying your own pleasure states, and you're not in this sort of call and response with your partner, where your partner's sounds and movements and motions of her body aren't informing you that she's experiencing pleasure that gives you a green light to go further with what you're doing. Sex is like a dance in that way, where, somebody leads and somebody follows, and you take turns doing that. Um, but if you're analyzing every single move because you're worried about how you look or if you're doing it right, that is definitely going to make the sexual act less creative and more stilted. And then someone writes, how can you advise with someone who has previous trauma of abusive relationships and is currently exploring sexuality and healthy relationships and sex in healthy relationships? Definitely therapy, but how can organization advise people who comes from unhealthy sexual relationships? Well, I think, uh, the person that has been sexually abused that is healing really needs to lead the charge on this. Um, that the person who's having this sexual desire, dysfunction, traumatic issues are the people who need to investigate that problem. And it doesn't mean as their partners, we can't go along for the ride and be curious and want to be helpful, but you shouldn't be leading the charge on that. Your partner should be leading the charge and telling you what they want and need. So having said that, if you go to the URL healthysex.com and you look at the work of Dr. Wendy Maltz, she wrote a book called The Sexual Healing Journey, and that is specifically for people who are in recovery from sexual abuse. And there are exercises in that book about how to start to reintroduce healthy sex in a way that feels safe, for the person that's recovering from the abuse. So hopefully that can be helpful for both of you on this sexual healing journey. And then someone writes, besides staying a little behind arousal and spreading touch to body over genitocentricity, how might a woman mitigate genital sensitivity? Pleasure often turns into overstimulation and overdone before climax, which I don't easily do anyway. I've long given up my own orgasm and lost partner sexual interest in me because I'm not quite sure what to do. Um, that sounds like a pretty complicated sex therapy question, that I'm not sure I can answer here without knowing somebody pretty intricately. So I would advise you that if you haven't seen a sex therapist, that is a really good recommendation for you at this time. because you have to be able to tolerate touch as a starting point. Because if you can't tolerate touch, then I don't know where you go from there. Uh, so again, I don't know the details, and this is not really the forum for that. So I would highly suggest that you make an appointment with a sex therapist that can help you. Okay, so as we move along here from um, to boundaries, are there parts of your body you don't want touched? As this writer just said, that touching genitals is way too much, too fast, too sensitive. Then your partner needs to know that. Does no mean no? And what are your boundaries around no, as I asked earlier? And then C stands for communication of the ABCs. Do you talk about your wants and needs to a partner? If they can't hear your wants and needs, what do you do then? As one person wrote, how do you find a way to communicate that? And I think that's a question for your partner. Since you don't want to talk about sex and you cannot hear my wants and needs, what do you suggest we do in order to get on the same page sexually? And it's not enough for that person to say, I don't know, or I don't have any ideas, because part of having an adult sexuality is being able to talk about sex and sexuality. And as I've said before, and others have said before me, that just getting into bed with the lights off and getting under the covers and sort of groping like teenagers having sex for the first time is not really an adult sexuality. An adult sexuality is in broad daylight with explicit conversations, being able to tolerate seeing your partner as a sexual being and being seen as a sexual being, and being able to, laugh about it, talk about it being awkward, but still having a conversation about the kind of sex you want to have. And do you let your partner know what you want, that you want to talk about sex, or do you just kind of silently wish they would figure that out? And how do you set the stage for these conversations? Do you just do it when you're in the car? Do you try to start talking about sex while you're having sex? There's something about being intentional with every single thing we do. So you're intentional when you go work out. You put on your workout clothes, you stretch, you either go to the gym or you put on some kind of DVD or get on your computer and you're going to do an exercise class online, but nonetheless, you are setting the stage in preparation. You get your water bottle organized to go exercise. And so setting the stage for having explicit sexual conversations is important. Maybe it's that you say to your partner, hey, this weekend, can we make time to talk? Yeah, I'm available. When? Oh, Saturday afternoon at 3. Great. Well, I really want to talk about sex. What do you mean you want to talk about sex? Well, I want to talk about, sex, what I like, what I don't like. I want to share with you what I'm learning about myself, which is very different than I want to talk about sex and our sex and what you're doing wrong, which is how often how people hear it. It's more about let me share with you what I know about myself and what I want and need. Can you hear it? And that is an invitation of reciprocity if the person is into it. But if they have too much shame, or they're embarrassed or they're uncomfortable, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, but you certainly can talk about yourself. And when you set the stage, say, hey, I want to go sit on the beach with you. I don't recommend taking a walk or driving in the car for sure. I recommend eye contact so that you are sitting together on a sofa, having a cup of tea with each other, or having a meal together, or sitting together in your backyard, but someplace where you can sit face to face, knee to knee, eyeball to eyeball, and have these conversations. Um, and how would those conversations feel to you, or how do they feel to you when you have them? And do you communicate your likes, dislikes, and boundaries? And can you imagine having a conversation about consent with a new partner? So, active imagining or visualization is a form of practice, like a rehearsal. So, once you get clear about what you like and don't like, what you want and need, who you are sexually at this stage of your life, then you can communicate it to a partner. And maybe if you're working with a workbook, you're going to have like a lot of writing and a lot of scribbling. If you're just working with a piece of paper, it's also probably going to be haphazard as you write things down or remember things. So how do you take the key themes and distill them down to a few bullet points that says, this is who I am, and this is what I want you to know about me, and this is what's really important to me sexually. How does that sound to you? And visualize yourself having that conversation with people, so that it's as native to you as it would be if I asked you, tell me about your favorite salad. What are the component pieces of a great salad? Um, and you should know right off the top of your head what you like and don't like. Like some people can't stand, dried cranberries or raisins in their salads or nuts in their salads. Other people hate tomatoes. So, what is your particular sexual salad made of? And are you super conversant in it and ready to talk about it without shame? All right. So, on that note, I hope that you will really think about what are my ABCs of consent and communication? How can I be a better lover to myself? And one of the ways I do that is by getting really clear about who I am, what I like. And you might find that you start to ask yourself that question and you figure out that I have no idea what I like. I haven't asked myself that question in 5, 10, 20 years. So let me ask it now. Let me do some investigation. Let me just think about what would really turn me on. Because what turned you on in your 20s may not in your late 30s, certainly won't in your 50s or 60s. So be honest with yourself. And it's okay if you're starting with a blank slate. Nature's way is that when we're young, it doesn't matter what we do or don't like. We're just aroused because that's a biological drive to procreate and evolve and have children. But as we get older and those drives are not there, then sex becomes about the development of a self, about who am I as an adult? What does my adult sexuality look like? And how am I going to be honest with myself about that? And communicate it to other people, which means I might need more foreplay. I might need lubrication, which I didn't previously need. I might need to take a pill in order to get an erection. And to just get real with yourself and not be ashamed about it and say, hey, this is the body I've got. I'm really grateful that I have a body and that I'm still in my body. And this is the way it works. And as my colleague Stan Tatkin says, it's important that we give each other our owner's manuals. So if you don't know how your body works, you cannot give your owner's manual to your partner, and it's not fair for them. They shouldn't have to guess or read your mind. All right. On that note, I hope you have a beautiful rest of the month of July, that you enjoy these long summer days, and that you practice sensuality and getting to know yourself sexually, and that you can communicate that to a partner in a healthy way. All right. Thank you. And I look forward to talking to you in August.